63 days ago, something happened inside Iran that should have been the lead story on every news channel on the planet for a month straight. It was not mentioned for more than 90 seconds on any American broadcast. 63 days ago, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the single most consequential adversary the United States has faced in the Middle East for 45 years, underwent the most significant leadership transition since the 1979 revolution. A new supreme leader took power, not a president, not a minister, the supreme leader. The one person in the Iranian system who controls the military, the nuclear program, the intelligence services, the judiciary, and the entire strategic direction of the nation. The one person whose decisions determine whether the Middle East moves toward peace or erupts into a war that drags in every major power on earth. And within his first week in power, before the Western media had even learned to spell his name correctly, he made a move. So calculated, so precise, and so devastating to American strategic interests that senior officials at the Pentagon requested an emergency briefing. Trump was briefed on a Saturday morning. He was told what happened, and according to 3 separate accounts from people familiar with that briefing, his first response was a single word: how. Not why, not when, how, because what this new leader did should not have been possible, not this fast, not this cleanly, not without anyone in Washington seeing it coming. And the fact that it happened the way it happened tells you something terrifying about the new Iran. This is not your father's Islamic Republic. This is not the aging, rigid, predictable adversary that American strategists have spent decades learning to manage. Something has changed, something fundamental, and almost nobody in the American media is explaining what it is, what it means, or why every single American should be paying very close attention right now. That is what this video is going to do. In the next 30 minutes, I am going to show you exactly who this new leader is, what he did in his first 72 hours that sent shockwaves through Washington, why the old American playbook for dealing with Iran just became obsolete overnight, and what this means for your gas prices, your investments, your safety, and the future balance of power on this planet. Every connection I draw will be based on documented events and verifiable patterns. And by the time we are done, you will understand something about the new geopolitical reality that 99% of Americans do not understand yet. Let us start with the transition itself, because the way it happened tells you everything about what comes next. For years, Western intelligence agencies had been preparing for this moment. Ayatollah Khamenei had been the supreme leader of Iran since 1989, 35 years, longer than most Iranians have been alive. Every strategic doctrine, every alliance, every proxy network, every nuclear calculation that defines modern Iran was built under his authority. Western analysts had modeled dozens of succession scenarios. They had profiles on every potential successor. They had war-gamed what each one would do in their first 100 days. The CIA had an entire unit dedicated to this question. The Pentagon had contingency plans for every possible outcome. They thought they were ready. They were not ready for this. The transition happened faster than anyone predicted. The official announcement came, and within hours the assembly of experts had confirmed the new supreme leader. Not days, not weeks, hours. That speed was itself a message. It told every government on earth that this was not a contested succession. This was not a power struggle between rival factions. This was a transition that had been planned, rehearsed, and coordinated long before it became public. The new leader did not seize power. He was installed smoothly, cleanly, with the full backing of every major power center in the Iranian system. The Revolutionary Guards, the intelligence services, the clerical establishment, the judiciary, all of them aligned behind one man before the rest of the world even knew what was happening. And that unanimity is what scared Washington more than anything else, because a divided Iran is a predictable Iran. Factions compete with each other. They leak information. They make mistakes. They create opportunities for outside powers to exploit divisions. A unified Iran is a completely different animal. A unified Iran moves fast, moves quietly, and moves with strategic coherence that is almost impossible to counter in real time. And that is exactly what the world got. Now let me tell you about the first move, because this is the part that most people have not heard, and it is the part that changes everything. Within 72 hours of taking power, the new supreme leader did not give a fiery speech about destroying Israel. He did not threaten the United States. He did not rattle any sabers. He did not do any of the things that Western media expects Iranian leaders to do. Instead, he picked up the phone and the calls he made in those 72 hours represent the most sophisticated diplomatic blitz that any Middle Eastern leader has executed in modern history. The first call went to Beijing, not a courtesy call, a working call, with specific proposals on the table. Within 48 hours of that call, China and Iran issued a joint statement announcing the acceleration of their 25-year strategic cooperation agreement. The original agreement had been signed years earlier, but implementation had been slow, bogged down in bureaucratic details and cautious incrementalism. The new leader blew through all of that in a single conversation. Fast-tracked energy infrastructure investment, fast-tracked military technology cooperation, fast-tracked integration of Iranian oil exports into the Chinese yuan-denominated trading system. The agreement that was supposed to take a decade to fully implement was put on an 18-month timeline. The second call went to Moscow. Same approach, specific proposals, immediate commitments. Russia and Iran announced an expanded defense cooperation framework that goes significantly beyond anything the two countries had previously agreed to: shared intelligence architecture, joint naval exercises in the Indian Ocean, and most critically, Russian commitment to modernize Iran's air defense systems to a level that would make any American or Israeli airstrike exponentially more costly and complex. This is not a symbolic gesture. This is a technical upgrade that fundamentally changes the military calculus in the region. The systems being discussed would create an integrated air defense network covering Iranian nuclear facilities, military installations, and critical infrastructure that would require a military operation of a scale and complexity that the United States has not attempted since the Second World War. The third call is the one that made Trump's jaw hit the floor. It went to Riyadh, to Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Iran's supposed blood enemy, the leader of the Sunni world calling the leader of the Shia world, or vice versa, depending on who dialed first, and what came out of that call was not a vague promise to reduce tensions. It was a specific, detailed framework for economic cooperation between the two largest oil producers in the Persian Gulf. Let me tell you why that call matters more than the other two combined. For 45 years, the foundation of American strategy in the Middle East has rested on one structural reality. Saudi Arabia and Iran hate each other. That hatred is the load-bearing wall of the entire American position in the region, as long as the Saudis fear Iran, they need American military protection. As long as they need American military protection, they price their oil in dollars. As long as they price their oil in dollars, the United States maintains its financial hegemony over the global economy. Saudi fear of Iran is not just a regional dynamic. It is the engine that powers American global dominance, and in one phone call, the new supreme leader of Iran put a crack in that engine. Tell me in the comments, before this video, had anyone ever explained to you that the US-Saudi alliance is fundamentally built on Saudi fear of Iran, and that if that fear disappears, the entire American position in the Middle East unravels? Had anyone ever connected those dots for you? Because that connection is the single most important thing you can understand about this region. Now here is what makes this new leader so dangerous from Washington's perspective. He is not doing what Iranian leaders are supposed to do. He is not playing the role that has been assigned to him in the American strategic framework. For decades, Iran's leaders have been reliably hostile, reliably confrontational, reliably theatrical. They give angry speeches, they burn flags, they chant slogans, and all of that plays perfectly into the American narrative. It keeps the Saudis scared. It keeps Congress willing to fund military bases in the Gulf. It keeps the whole system running. This new leader is not giving Washington any of that. He is calm. He is strategic. He is speaking the language of economics and diplomacy rather than ideology and confrontation. And that is infinitely more threatening to American interests than any missile test or angry speech could ever be, because you can counter a missile. You can respond to a threat. You can use an angry speech as justification for sanctions. But how do you counter a phone call to Saudi Arabia offering economic cooperation? How do you sanction a diplomatic conversation? How do you justify military spending against an adversary who is publicly advocating for regional stability and trade? This is the trap, and the new leader said it within his first 72 hours. He is making it strategically impossible for the United States to maintain the narrative that has justified its Middle Eastern posture for nearly half a century. He is pulling the thread that holds the whole thing together, and he is doing it so quietly and so diplomatically that by the time Washington figures out how to respond, the damage will already be done. But here is what most people miss: this is not just diplomatic genius. This is the result of decades of preparation. The new supreme leader did not come up with this strategy in his first week in office. This playbook was developed, refined, and rehearsed over years. Iran has been studying the American system with the intensity that a chess grandmaster studies an opponent's previous games. They know every American vulnerability. They know every pressure point. They know that the United States is stretched thin between its competition with China, its involvement in European security dynamics, and its domestic political divisions. And they designed a strategy that exploits every single one of those vulnerabilities simultaneously without firing a single shot. Think about what just happened from Washington's perspective. In 72 hours, Iran locked in deeper cooperation with America's two primary global competitors, China and Russia. Simultaneously, it began the process of neutralizing America's most important regional ally, Saudi Arabia, and it did all of this while projecting an image of moderation and diplomatic reasonableness that makes any American military response look disproportionate and unjustified. That is not a first move, that is a checkmate in 3 moves, and the game just started. If this analysis is connecting dots that no headline has connected for you, a like genuinely helps this reach more people who need to understand what is actually happening. Now let me show you what this means for you personally, because this is where it stops being abstract and starts being about your money. The Saudi-Iran rapprochement is the single most important variable in the global oil market right now, and most Americans have no idea it is happening. Here is why it matters to your wallet. When Saudi Arabia and Iran are hostile to each other, they compete for market share by keeping production high and prices relatively stable. That competition has been one of the guardrails preventing oil price spikes for the last several decades. When Saudi Arabia and Iran start cooperating, they have the ability to coordinate production cuts. Together, they control roughly 20% of global oil output if they agree to cut production simultaneously, even by a small percentage. Oil prices do not just rise, they spike. And when oil prices spike, you know exactly what happens. Gas goes up, groceries go up, shipping costs go up, everything goes up. But there is a second dimension that is even more consequential. If Saudi Arabia begins accepting currencies other than the dollar for oil sales, which is exactly the direction this new relationship is pointing, it triggers a slow-motion earthquake in the global financial system. The petrodollar arrangement has been the invisible foundation. Beneath the American economy for 50 years, it is the reason the U.S. can maintain a military budget larger than the next 10 countries combined. It is the reason the U.S. can run enormous budget deficits without its currency collapsing. It is the reason your mortgage rate is not 20% right now when that foundation cracks. Every single one of those benefits starts to erode, not overnight, but steadily and irreversibly. Now let me address what the markets are already telling us, because the money is always ahead of the politicians. In the weeks following these announcements, several things happened simultaneously in global financial markets that most retail investors did not connect. Gold prices moved up significantly. That is the classic safe haven signal. When institutional investors are worried about dollar stability, they move into gold. It is the oldest playbook in finance. Defense stocks in the United States rose sharply. That tells you that smart money is pricing in increased military spending and regional instability. The market is not betting on peace. It is betting on a more complex and more expensive security environment. Oil futures shifted into a pattern called backwardation, where near-term prices are higher than long-term prices. In plain English, that means the market believes oil supply is going to get tighter in the short term. Traders are pricing in the possibility of coordinated production. Management between Iran and Saudi Arabia before most people even know those conversations are happening. And here is the one that should concern every American with a retirement account. The yield on US Treasury bonds ticked upward. That might sound like a minor technical detail. It is not. When Treasury yields rise, it means the market is demanding a higher return to hold American debt, which means the market's confidence in the long term. The stability of the dollar-based financial system just decreased by a measurable amount. Not a crisis, not a collapse, but a shift, a repricing, the beginning of a reassessment that, if it continues, will affect the interest rate on your mortgage, the return on your savings, the value of your retirement portfolio, and the purchasing power of every dollar you earn. Now let us talk about the military dimension, because this is where the situation gets genuinely dangerous. The new supreme leader's diplomatic moves are not happening in a vacuum. They are happening against the backdrop of a rapidly evolving military reality that most Americans are completely unaware of. Iran's military capabilities have transformed over the last decade in ways that fundamentally changed the strategic equation. This is not the Iran of 2003 that watched the United States roll through Iraq in 3 weeks and took notes. This is an Iran that spent 20 years studying American military doctrine and designing specific countermeasures for every American capability. Their drone program is now one of the most advanced in the world, not the most expensive, not the most technologically sophisticated, but arguably the most strategically effective. They have demonstrated the ability to produce thousands of low-cost drones that can overwhelm expensive American air defense systems through sheer numbers. Each American interceptor missile costs between $1 and $4 million. Each Iranian drone costs a few thousand. The math is devastating. You do not need to be a military genius to understand that you cannot sustain a defense that costs 1,000 times more than the offense. Their missile program has achieved accuracy levels that Western intelligence did not predict they would reach for another decade. They have developed the ability to strike targets across the entire Middle East with precision that makes every American military base in the region a potential target. They have demonstrated this capability publicly, which is itself a strategic message. They are not hiding their capabilities, they are advertising them. That is a deterrent posture, and it is working. And now, with the Russian Air Defense Cooperation Agreement accelerated under the new leader, the window for a conventional military strike on Iranian nuclear facilities is closing rapidly. Within 18 months, according to analysts at several major defense research institutions, the air defense environment over Iran will be dense, Enough that any strike package would require a scale of operation, a level of risk, and a probable casualty count that no American president could politically survive authorizing. The new supreme leader knows this. Every move he makes is designed to run out the clock until that window closes permanently, and every day that passes without. A strike is a day closer to a reality where military options are effectively off the table. This is the strategic nightmare that was presented to Trump in that Saturday morning briefing. Not a single dramatic threat, not a single provocation that justifies an immediate response. Just a quiet, systematic, methodical closing of every door that the United States has relied on to maintain its position. Diplomacy neutralizing. Saudi Arabia, economics undermining the petrodollar, military modernization closing the strike window, all happening simultaneously, all happening quietly, all happening while the American media talks about something else entirely. Now here is where I need to be completely honest with you about something that most commentators will not say out loud. There is a debate happening inside the American national security establishment right now that is more intense and more consequential than anything the public is aware of, and that debate boils down to a single question. Did we lose Iran? Not did we lose a battle. Not did we lose a negotiation. Did we lose the entire strategic contest that has defined American Middle East policy for 45 years? Because there is a growing recognition among serious strategic thinkers that the answer might be yes. Not because Iran won militarily, not because Iran is stronger than the United States, but because Iran achieved something that the United States never anticipated and has no playbook to counter. Iran made itself essential to two alternative power structures, the Chinese economic sphere and the Russian security sphere, while simultaneously reaching out to neutralize America's regional allies. It built a strategic position that does not depend on American permission or American tolerance, and it did all of this while under the most comprehensive sanctions regime in modern history. That is the part that should truly unsettle every American policymaker. The sanctions were supposed to prevent exactly this outcome. They were supposed to keep Iran isolated, weak, and dependent on negotiating with the West. Instead, the sanctions forced Iran to build relationships with China and Russia that are now deeper, more resilient, and more strategically significant than anything Iran ever had with the West, even during the Shah era. The policy designed to contain Iran may have accidentally created a more formidable adversary than the one it was trying to contain. That is not a failure of execution. That is a failure of fundamental strategic logic, and the new Supreme Leader is the embodiment of that failure's consequences. Drop your answer in the comments. Do you believe the United States still has viable options to counter Iran's new strategic position, or has the window for effective American influence over Iran's trajectory already closed? I want to hear your honest assessment because the comments on this channel consistently produce insights that rival anything coming out of Washington's think tanks. Now let me show you the 3 scenarios that serious analysts are actually discussing for what comes next. Not the cable news fantasy scenarios, the real ones. Scenario 1 is the grand bargain. The United States recognizes that the old approach has failed and enters into direct, comprehensive negotiations with the new Iranian leadership. Not a narrow nuclear deal, a broad strategic understanding that addresses the nuclear program, regional security architecture, economic normalization, and a mutual framework for coexistence. This would be the most significant diplomatic achievement in the Middle East since the Camp David Accords. It would require the United States to accept Iran as a legitimate regional power with legitimate security interests. It would require Iran to accept verifiable limits on its nuclear program and constraints on its most destabilizing regional activities. It would require both sides to do something they have never been willing to do: treat each other as equals. The probability of this scenario under the current American political environment is very low, but under the right circumstances, with the right political cover, it is not impossible, and the new Iranian leader's diplomatic approach suggests he would be open to it. Scenario 2 is the managed competition. Both sides accept that neither can defeat the other and settle into a long-term strategic competition that is intense but bounded. Think of it as a Cold War model adapted for the Middle East. Both sides maintain their alliances, their military postures, and their competing visions for the region. But both sides also maintain back-channel communication and observe written red lines that prevent direct military confrontation. This is essentially a continuation of the current dynamic but at a higher level of sophistication and intensity. The risk of this scenario is that managed competition can become unmanaged very quickly. A single miscalculation by either side, a drone strike that hits the wrong target, a naval incident in the Gulf, a proxy attack that crosses an unspoken line, and the entire framework collapses into uncontrolled escalation. History is filled with managed competitions that ended in unmanaged wars. This is currently considered the most likely scenario. Scenario 3 is the restructured Middle East. This is the scenario that the new supreme leader appears to be actively building toward, and it is the one that most fundamentally challenges American interests. In this scenario, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the other Gulf states gradually build a regional security and economic framework. That does not include the United States as a central player, not an anti-American alliance, but a regional order in which American military presence is no longer the primary guarantor of stability. Chinese economic investment and Russian security cooperation fill the spaces that the United States currently occupies, the dollar's role. In regional energy trade diminishes gradually over a decade. American military bases in the region become strategically redundant and politically untenable. The United States does not get kicked out, it gets made unnecessary. And the new Supreme Leader's first 72 hours in power suggest that this is exactly the future he is building. Now let me tell you what none of these scenarios accounts for, and why you should be paying closer attention than you have ever paid to anything happening in the Middle East. Every single one of these scenarios assumes rational actors making calculated decisions, but the Middle East has never operated exclusively on rational calculation. It operates on a volatile mixture of strategy, ideology, historical grievance, personal ego, domestic political pressure, and pure unpredictable chance. The new Iranian leader may be the most strategically sophisticated leader Tehran has produced in decades, but he is operating in a system where a single assassination, a single terrorist attack, a single miscalculated military operation by any one of a dozen actors could throw every carefully laid plan into chaos overnight. And on the American side, the variable is even more unpredictable. Trump does not operate on strategic calculation. He operates on instinct, ego, and a deeply personal sense of dominance and submission. He views every international relationship as a contest that he must visibly win. The new Iranian leader's strategy is specifically designed to deny Trump a visible victory while quietly achieving Iran's objectives. That is a strategy that works brilliantly against a rational strategic actor. Against Trump, it is a provocation, because the one thing Trump cannot tolerate is being outmaneuvered by someone the American public has never heard of, and when Trump feels outmaneuvered, he does not retreat into careful analysis. He escalates. That dynamic, a strategically brilliant Iranian leader systematically closing American options while an emotionally reactive American president watches his leverage disappear, is the most dangerous combination imaginable. It is a formula for miscalculation, and miscalculation in this context means war. This is the thing that keeps the adults in every intelligence agency and every defense ministry on both sides awake at night. Not the planned moves, not the strategic calculations, the unplanned ones, the AM tweet that goes too far, the proxy strike that kills someone it was not supposed to kill, the intelligence failure that leads to a wrong conclusion, the domestic political pressure that forces a leader into a corner from which the only exit is military action. Every single major war of the last century started not because someone wanted war, but because the accumulated pressure of moves and countermoves created a situation where war became the only option that no one had explicitly chosen. This is why understanding what is happening right now is not optional for you. This is not a story about a country on the other side of the world. This is a story about the forces that determine the price of your gas, the value of your savings, the safety of your children if they serve in the military, the stability of the economy you depend on, and the future of the global order that has provided the framework for American prosperity for 80 years. Every single one of those things is actively in play right now, and the decisions being made in Tehran, in Washington, in Beijing, in Riyadh, and in Moscow over the next 12 months will shape the world your children grow up in more than any election, any Supreme Court decision, or any domestic policy debate. The new Supreme Leader of Iran made his first move. It was not a missile. It was not a threat. It was a phone call, 3 phone calls. And those 3 phone calls did more damage to American strategic positioning than 45 years of Iranian missiles, proxies, and angry speeches combined, because missiles can be intercepted, threats can be countered, angry speeches can be dismissed, but a quiet, calculated restructuring of the entire regional order, executed with diplomatic precision by a leader who understands finance, strategy, and power at a level that his predecessors never did, that is something the United States has no existing playbook to defeat. And that is what Trump was told on that Saturday morning. Not that Iran had attacked, not that Iran had threatened, that Iran had outmaneuvered. And for a man who has built his entire identity on being the smartest person in every room, on never being outplayed, on always winning, that word, outmaneuvered, was worse than any missile could ever be. The question now is what he does next, and the answer to that question will determine whether the next chapter of this story is written in diplomatic cables or in blood. The world changed 63 days ago. Most people do not know it yet. Now you do, and knowing is not just power. In a world where most people are blind to the forces that control their lives, knowing is survival. If you made it to the end of this breakdown, you now understand more about the new strategic reality in the Middle East than most people who work in Washington. That is not an exaggeration. That is a reflection of how poorly the American public has been served by a media system that covers explosions but ignores the quiet moves that actually reshape the world. Subscribe if you have not already. Every single breakdown on this channel is built to do one thing: show you what is actually happening, not what someone wants you to believe is happening. The next video on this channel covers the specific economic mechanism by which these changes will reach your household, your bank account, and your daily life, even if you never think about the Middle East again. That analysis is coming soon, and it connects directly to everything you just learned. This has been an Atlas Geopolitical Analysis. All content is educational commentary and opinion based on historical patterns and publicly available information.